Welcome, everyone. I'm Alexandre Stepanovic, founder of Cascades Analytics, a media and advisory platform covering the psychedelics and neuroplastogens pipeline. We go where the action is. We talk with the founders, the scientists, the regulators, the therapists, the people shaping the next wave of psychiatric drugs. My guest today is Melissa Lavasani, founder and CEO of the Psychedelic Medicine Coalition, the DC-based national advocacy group vowing to bring access to psychedelic medicine across the country. Melissa authored DC's Initiative 81, the largest ballot initiative win in Washington's history at 76% approval, and has since taken the fight to Congress. Melissa is a trailblazer, and much of the political and legal groundwork that makes access possible in this country is thanks to her work. Hi, Melissa. So glad to have you here today.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Let's dive in. My first question for you is your entry into this space started from a deeply personal place. And does that original urgency still drive you, or has the work become more institutional over time?
My work is rooted in my personal experience. So thinking about how patients are going to interact with our healthcare system, how they're going to interact with psychedelics in general, and the kind of ecosystem that's going to get built around it. That's always motivated by my personal experiences and experiences that I hear from folks all around the country every day. So in some regards, I think this will always be really personal for me. But also, I hope that the dialogue continues to advance, and I hope that we continue to dig deeper and deeper into what the advocates need to be doing in this field, what the academics need to be doing, how drug development's advancing, and how the healthcare infrastructure continues to get built.
What's the legal breakthrough you're the most proud to have been a part of?
I mean, there have been few legal breakthroughs on the federal level. I think at the federal level, it's very much a long game. And progress is sometimes very slow to move with moments of acceleration. We've definitely seen accelerated moments this year with the president's executive order. Personally, I'm super proud of the DC campaign. That was a decriminalization campaign, and I don't really work on that anymore. However, I learned so much through that experience, and I got connected to so many folks in the field and in Washington D.C. that had been impacted by mental health of their own experiences or experiences of loved ones, and it really informed me about my decrim campaign. While we don't really work on decrim at the federal level, it really informed me about what policy trajectory this issue really needs to be on. I think in the beginning of this work, we're very much following the cannabis playbook in tackling some of these access issues and criminal justice issues. And while, that campaign was wildly successful, I think that got attributed, that success can be attributed to the pandemic coincidentally happening at the same time and really changing the dialogue around mental health, and kind of opening up this space to having real honest discussions about what it's like to navigate our healthcare system with a mental health or addiction issue. And what I learned from that campaign kind of set the foundation for what I'm doing now with the federal government. I learned that, healthcare access is probably the safest point of access we can establish right now. I learned that this isn't necessarily a same issue in the way that cannabis is. I think cannabis is, the policy trajectory has been very different for them. And certainly there's psychedelics is set up really in a much different way, with the fact that we have so much scientific research that's happening behind our issue. And it's less of a recreational dialogue than it is. This is about healthcare treatments, FDA approvals, and healthcare infrastructure. So, I'm proud of, my entry into this field was through that campaign. But what I am most proud of is, my vision for how psychedelic policy was going to get crafted was never it was never going to be the advocates pushing the government to move forward with this issue. I never wanted this to be I never wanted the psychedelic field to have an adversarial relationship with the federal government in the same way that cannabis does. It feels like that was always an uphill battle. With psychedelics, I really wanted to have our advocacy designed around educating the right stakeholders within the government and kind of the stakeholders that reside in Washington, D.C. outside the government system, and getting them to see how important this is, how meaningful this work is, how impressive the science is around psychedelics. And I wanted a lot of the forward movement to be generated from within government. So now we're seeing this year, the fruits of that labor. Certainly the president's executive order opened up a lot of doors, and I think it brought a lot of work that was happening very quietly behind the scenes to the surface. And now, we're continuing to see NIH fund more studies. We obviously have the priority vouchers at the FDA, and kind of FDA's, blessing almost on, them wanting to be proper facilitators of this as a regulatory body without compromising any of the science around what needs to be evaluated with psychedelics and their safety and efficacy. So we're also seeing, this year there was also a MOU between the VA and HHS. There's an MOU between the VA and FDA. We've seen some forward movement in Congress. Congress has been a little bit difficult to navigate through just because there's a lot going on in our country, and there's psychedelics. They move up and down the priority list depending on what else is happening, what else is on congressional plates. So I'm happy where we are at. It seems like we're talking about the right things. We have the government as an ally in this process, and they really would like to see psychedelic medicine get implemented in our healthcare system the right way, and they're going about it in the right way. And I think that's like the proudest moment for me, is that we're finally in this place where we're not fighting the government and trying to convince them that this is the right next step for healthcare. They see the writing on the wall. They've read the studies. They're seeing how effective some of these psychedelic treatments can be for people. And I think that they're excited about this innovation, and they want to see this done the right way. And I think some of the motivation is, cannabis kind of trailblazing and, not necessarily getting things right in the first pass, and the psychedelics movement learning what they can from the cannabis movement and other movements of the past. Like, a lot of my work is informed by the AIDS movement in the 80s and how they designed the advocacy around that, and really getting the government as a partner in this. And I feel like we're finally in a place where the government is a partner and they're wanting to take a lead, and that's just amazing to see.
How were you able to get partners? How were you able to get ears, and how did you do that? By directly focusing on the VA, or on bipartisans, or do you think what's
it's a combination. It's really a combination of things. And certainly Psychedelic Medicine Coalition isn't the only organization that's been doing this work. We are the only organization based in Washington, D.C., but I've had some help from some friends. I think in the beginning, it was very much keep it really high level, talk about the scientific research. I had to do a lot of undoing of preconceived notions of what this was. I think for when I started in this with this advocacy, it was very much like cannabis and psychedelics moving together. And I've had to kind of separate from the issue of cannabis, because it's really two different tracks. And so when in the beginning, the conversations were very focused on academic research, the FDA trials were they were in phase 1 and phase 2. So, that has developed over time, where we have continued to bring stories to the forefront. I think stories of personal experiences with psychedelics is always a really important element to bring into the dialogue, to humanize this issue, to make sure it's not it's not super sterile, right? Like these are people's lives that are getting impacted by mental health and addiction. And, we need to be sure that the patient experience is at the forefront of that discussion. The veteran community has certainly come out in full force over the last 3 years of this issue, and have really been a steady presence in sharing their experiences with how they have interacted with the VA and trying to navigate these issues, how they have been left disappointed and in some cases harmed by what their treatment options were. And that's been really instrumental in bringing this to a whole other level, is the fact that we have a very specific population of people within the veteran community that just have received no relief from any traditional treatments that have been available to them. And they're at a point where, they're frustrated, and so many people have lost their lives because we haven't been able to provide solutions for them. So our work's always been nonpartisan, and it's going to remain that way. We need to be sure that this issue doesn't get parked in one political party or the other. Washington, D.C. changes hands all the time. We're coming up against some midterm elections in November, and an entire Congress could change over to the other party, and presidents change, and priorities change when the parties change in Washington, D.C. So we have to be sure that mental health and healthcare are a priority with both sides of the aisle. I think that that's how we keep this work moving forward, is to keep it nonpartisan and keep it out of the political dialogue. So, making sure that we are creating an argument for psychedelics that is based in the science, it's based in the evidence, and not based in our feelings about psychedelics. I'm passionate about this work, but also understanding your audience and knowing what they need to see to really support this issue. And a lot of times that isn't the dialogue that most folks want to have. I know a lot of folks talk about the spirituality aspect of psychedelics, and that's been brought up to me so many times. Are we talking about this with members of Congress? But I've really I've kind of kept the dialogue about psychedelics at a really basic level. It doesn't need to be incredibly nuance with elements of spirituality, elements of consciousness expanding. Those kind of conversations are a bit more advanced than where our lawmakers are at. So, not that I'm saying that they're not important elements of a psychedelic experience, but bringing a lawmaker along for the ride on this issue from the very beginning, and letting them feel like this is safe for them to put their name on is extremely important. And I think kind of getting in some of the nuanced discussions that the psychedelic community can get into we could potentially use some allies on this issue. So I really keep it squarely based on the evidence and personal stories. And I think that using that strategy has kept it nonpartisan.
Do you see one psychedelic as most promising right now on the Hill or at the FDA?
There's a lot of dialogue about ibogaine, but and I understand certainly the excitement around ibogaine, but from my perspective in Washington, D.C., that is furthest down the road as far as the FDA process, as far as research goes. Obviously, the two psychedelics that we talk about the most are psilocybin and MDMA. They're the furthest along in the process. At the FDA, there's the most amount of evidence around psilocybin and MDMA, and that is where a lot of attention is going to. Personally, for me, I've always kind of thought that 5-MeO-DMT is the sleeper of all psychedelics. And I think the Eli Lilly deal recently is evidence of, how much they have invested in that, is evidence of how impactful 5-MeO-DMT can be. So I'm excited to see more about that. I'm excited to have more dialogue about that, because I think that 5-MeO kind of fits into our clinical model, our traditional clinical model, much easier in that, like, you can keep it in an hour session. It's extremely impactful. And the evidence around it is really promising. So I think we're leading with psilocybin and MDMA, but we're certainly having discussions about all psychedelics, including ibogaine. But I think that psilocybin and MDMA are going to lead the way here.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And what legislation are you actively working on at the moment?
Well, there's multiple pieces of legislation out right now. We support, just in general, our organization supports any legislation that supports the healthcare infrastructure that's going to get built. So, we've gotten behind legislation that's been put out by the Psychedelic Caucus, the Innovative Therapy Centers of Excellence Act. We're about to endorse the Ibogaine Act that Morgan Luttrell put out with some of his colleagues within the Psychedelic Caucus. There's Sheehy bill in the Senate side. That is a pretty comprehensive bill for the VA. But nothing is, because we're in an election year and we're getting so close to the election, it's going to be really hard to move anything forward in Congress at this point in time. There is potentially opportunities to slip something into another package. But Congress has been kind of a mess this year. And, I think a lot of our work, while Congress has been working itself out, we've shifted our focus a little bit more into the field and kind of organizing the field in a way that can show up in Washington, D.C. for the next Congress. So in January, we'll have a new Congress where we'll have to do an entirely new round of education for new members. We'll have to reintroduce the pieces of legislation that are out right now in this Congress, and in some sense start over. But I think that it is in a way starting over, but we're building the case for this, and this is the kind of cadence of how we need to work in Washington. It's walking miles and miles and miles and having incremental movements forward, and progress can seem really slow, like I've said before, but it still is important that we continue to talk to Congress about psychedelics, that we continue to get champions for this issue within both chambers of Congress. And, I think that there's a lot of opportunity with this next Congress, for sure, to build on all the work that has happened over the last 6 years of us doing this work, and to really get some forward movement that is in collaboration with the executive side. HHS is truly taking the lead here, and I think that knowing there's not going to be a barrier from the White House is helpful for members of Congress as well. Like, this is not going to be political suicide for them to get behind psychedelics, because so much is happening on the agency side that they can really dig their heels into what needs to happen next for Congress, for psychedelics.
Yes, next year there might be some FDA-approved psychedelics. So how is that going to change your strategy?
Yeah. I mean, our strategy, we've always been in anticipation of FDA-approved psychedelics. I think the dialogue has really, it has advanced from when we started. We were just trying to get research funding out of Congress, but now we're at a point where the dialogue has advanced in a way where we have to think about, what does patient access look like? FDA has put out their final guidance for what they want to see with psychedelic assisted treatments. So that's been really important. And I think that our work will continue to focus on healthcare infrastructure and supporting the field and organizing the field in a way that can show up in Washington and be really effective. So I think that right now there's a real sense of urgency to kind of tackle some of these healthcare infrastructure issues, like clinician training, clinician education, public education. Insurance reimbursement is obviously a huge issue that we will need to tackle at some point. There's all kinds of we don't really have protocols set for what psychedelic assisted care looks like after FDA approvals. And I think that there's a lot of this can be tackled. A lot of these dialogues can be had within the field. And, the healthcare system is only going to cover so much, right? They're going to cover the preparation and the administration of the medicine and, the support sessions after that experience. But so many folks that work in the field understand that the medicine is just one part of the experience, and how you implement some of the lessons that you learn from your psychedelic experience into your life is what's going to determine if you can really heal. So I think that the support that we can provide patients after their psychedelic experience is what's really going to make a difference. And if psychedelics are effective or not as a healthcare treatment. And, our work for the second half of this year and moving forward into next has really been focused on organizing the field in a way so that we're not working in silos, that we can collaborate with each other, we can coordinate, we can think really strategically about how we all need to work and support patients getting access to psychedelics. And we have something called our harmonization initiative that we are building a founding partner cohort right now. And that's an effort to organize the field so that, and have like a vehicle for communication with each other. Our field is really small right now, and the work seems overwhelming at times. And it always ends up us, those of us in the field tend to work in silos. So working in silos is not the most efficient way to get anything done. I think that our harmonization initiative is an effort to open up these channels of communication and provide some structure around how we work. And, this was really motivated by PMC hosting a federal summit every year. We hosted our last federal summit on May 14th of this year. And what I learned from doing this a few times now is that meeting once a year as a field is not enough. And we need to really come together and collaborate intentionally with each other so that we can be really organized about how we do support patients going through the psychedelic experience. It's not as simple as just getting your FDA approval. A lot of focus has been on the FDA approval piece and the access piece within the VA, but we know that there's a whole lot of community building that needs to be executed on, and there's a whole lot of other stakeholders that need to be brought into this issue, like traditional mental health care, like medical associations need to be brought into this issue. So it can seem overwhelming at times because our field is not very big, but we are focusing on how we bring all these pieces together.
Do you have a date for the next PMC summit?
No, not yet, because psychedelic science, usually in May, and psychedelic science scheduled for May of 2027. So I'm thinking we're going to shift to the fall of 2027. And, because I think psychedelic science is just like a huge conference. And, I know I'm fatigued after it. And, I think for PMC next year, we'll probably have more and smaller gatherings throughout the year. And then we'll hopefully end the year with the federal summit. And, but I'll keep you posted on that.
And you mentioned insurance reimbursement. So none of the current bills tackle insurance reimbursement directly.
Yeah.
Is that the next fight?
It's going to be a longer term game here, I think, until we get to a point where insurance is really is covering the majority of the costs. It's not necessarily the medicines that in themselves that are expensive. It's man hours that have to go into that experience. And the FDA guidelines indicate, two people a part of every psychedelic experience. That's going to be costly. And I think that, we're going to continue to have a dialogue on how insurance coverage can really be groundbreaking for patient access. And, it's going to be probably not as much coverage in the beginning, right after FDA approvals. And I think over time, that coverage will change over, more and more data getting collected, that this is a treatment that's worth covering for insurance, unfortunately. So that's kind of one of these longer term fights that we're going to have. And, there are some really great advocacy organizations and other organizations out there that are doing really great work for engaging with insurance. Ultimately, like, we need to have an economic study around why this is worth it. And we got to put a dollar sign to it. It's kind of just how our system is built, so that these insurance companies can see a benefit to covering these treatments.
Mm-hmm. Do you think psychedelics can help fix parts of what you've called a broken healthcare system?
I think in the macro, yes. Our focus right now should not be on fixing a broken healthcare system. I think because that's just like too big of a monster to take on. I think our focus is now getting psychedelic assisted care to fit into this healthcare system, and slowly over time chip away at the pieces of it that are broken, that don't really necessarily serve psychedelic assisted care. And I think that's been a real challenge. It's been a challenge for the FDA to kind of figure out how they're going to evaluate psychedelics, because, we kind of saw this with the MDMA decision in 2024, where we had therapy attached to a molecule, and FDA is, their mandate says always they approve drugs and not necessarily regulate therapy. So that put them in kind of an odd position. So it's always been a very much like, how do you fit these experiences into this system that is like the antithesis of psychedelics? And it's very much a square peg in a round hole type situation. So I think that, it's just going to take some time. And I think that when hopefully 20 years down the road, we'll see changes in healthcare delivery that we can point to and say, a lot of these conversations were initiated through psychedelic advocacy, but our intent is not necessarily to fix a broken healthcare system. I think that is a much more intense battle to take on, rooted in how just our society is set up. But I think that there's going to have to be some transformation on the healthcare side for sure. And there's going to have to be some transformation on the patient side as well. I think, we're kind of accustomed to going to the doctor, getting a prescription, and going home, taking that prescription and waiting to see if that works. And psychedelic assisted care cannot operate that way. These are going to be in-clinic treatments. They are not, kind of a one and done type situation. It requires your active participation in the short, mid, and long term. I think I work every day to make sure my mental health is intact. And, I actually think I've gotten to the place where I've gotten and it was initiated by psychedelics, but I can say that I'm healed because I put a lot of work into it. And that's a different paradigm for a lot of Americans and how they view healthcare. Mm-hmm. So it's like you have to become an expert in your own life and how to fix your own life. Mm-hmm. And we're not necessarily we're reliant on the healthcare system to deliver the medicine, but it's going to take active participation from all parties involved. And A lot of that just comes from, we need to do some public education. We need to get patients to understand that this isn't, you take you get your medicine administered a few times and then you're magically cured. But we're going to get there. And these types of things never move at the pace that you want them to move at, but I think they are moving slowly. And it's actually, like, I know so many people were disappointed at that MDMA decision in 2024, but for me, I was relieved. It gave us some breathing room to think about what psychedelics needed to look like in the American system. And I think because of that, there was a lot of course correcting that was done. And now we are talking about things like healthcare infrastructure and insurance reimbursement, where those were not as necessarily as big a topics. It was just the FDA approval that we were talking about before. And from my perspective, that was frustrating because, I know that this isn't as simple as an FDA approval. So it's allowed us to really develop a dialogue and to figure out a game plan for how we're going to tackle some of these issues.
And ideally design the session or the endpoints to be compatible with a possible reimbursement.
Yes.
In the future, but do the work and become an agent of the healing process rather than being assisted, which is quite a shift. Thank you so much. Before another interruption, happens, I'm so frustrated by this. This is so important and interesting. But I wanted to ask you if the gods of spectrum let us. How do you see the field in 5 years, ideally?
Oh, I think the field in 5 years is going to be really sophisticated. I think that the psychedelic ecosystem has come such a long way over the last 6 years that I've been working in this field. And, my hope is that we are more organized as a field. Obviously, we have our harmonization initiative that's hopefully going to initiate that, but I'd like to see a lot more collaborations within the field. I also would love to see more collaborations from outside stakeholders, buy-in from our, mental health ecosystem, buy-in from the healthcare ecosystem, establish clinician training, established protocols for what psychedelic assisted care looks like, and continuing to have more and more research funded. There's still so much that we need to learn about psychedelics. So, we will always be in support of any research funding that Congress wants to put out around this. And, at that point in time, like we're going to have at least 3 approved FDA approved psychedelics. And, I'm hoping that, we get the public education. Really, that's something that we would really love to initiate. So we have an informed public, a field that's collaborative and working together towards common goals, and a government that is continuing to support psychedelic assisted care and its continued rollout.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Melissa, for your participation and your trailblazing work. Stay with me for 1 second as I wrap this up. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Sorry for the technological imperfections, and have a nice summer until September, where we'll have another exciting interview. Send me any questions you might have for Melissa in the meantime, and enjoy the rest of your summer. Bye.